On the evening of December 12, 2020, the humid air of a Perth summer was thick, with the scent of burning rubber and the deafening roar of dragsters. Thousands of families had gathered at the Perth Motorplex, expecting a night of high-octane entertainment. But amidst the chaos of the engines, a silent and invisible threat was watching from the darkness. Precisely 335 meters away, a single projectile was released, cutting through the night air to shatter the festivities and mark one of the most audacious and calculated acts in Australian criminal history. The target was Nick Martin, a man who had long stood as a titan within the nation's motorcycle underworld. In front of a crowd of innocent bystanders, the former leader of the Rebels Motorcycle Club was struck down, bringing a sudden and shocking end to a life defined by power, intimidation, and controversy. To truly understand how a figure like Martin could become the focal point of such a high-stakes, professional operation, we must look back to where it all began, far removed from the headlines and the leather-clad hierarchy of outlaw clubs. Nick Martin's story did not start in the Australian bush, but in the United Kingdom in 1969. Born to Sid and Rhoda Martin, Nick was, from his very first breath, a formidable physical presence. His mother would later recall that even the attending doctor commented on the infant's sheer size and the clenched power of his fists upon delivery. It was as if he was born ready for a fight. When he was just 6 months old, the family emigrated, eventually making Australia their permanent home, where Nick's imposing nature began to shape his destiny. By the time he reached his school years, Nick had developed a reputation for intense aggression and unyielding competitiveness. On the rugby field, he was a force of nature, using his natural size to dominate opponents and terrified peers. However, this physicality spilled over into the classroom, where his disruptive behavior made him a constant concern for educators. At the age of 17, seeking independence and a life lived on his own terms, Nick left home. He found work that suited his stature perfectly, working security at nightclubs. This role as a bouncer was his gateway into a shadowy world that operated after dark, placing him in the orbit of the very figures he would one day lead. His first significant collision with the justice system came in 1988 at the age of 18, resulting in a conviction for dangerous driving and a substantial fine. Through the 1990s, his name appeared more frequently in police files, including a notable 1996 altercation at the Aqua nightclub, which resulted in charges for causing physical harm. But the true turning point arrived in 2005. The Rebels Motorcycle Club, one of the country's most notorious groups, was facing a crisis. With their long-serving president incarcerated, a power vacuum had formed. At the time, the Rebels were considered underdogs compared to larger rivals, but Nick saw potential where others saw disarray. He joined with a vision, bringing a strategic mind and a ruthlessness that would soon transform the club entirely. Nick Martin was an anomaly in the traditional world of outlaw motorcycle clubs. Standing nearly 6'5" and possessing a frame that seemed carved from granite, he earned the moniker, the Man Mountain, a title that commanded immediate respect. However, it was not just his size that set him apart, it was his vision for the Rebels. While the old guard of the biker scene was synonymous with unkempt beards, grease-stained denim, and a rough, chaotic lifestyle, Nick ushered in a new era of image consciousness. He was frequently seen sporting fresh, branded Nike apparel, and maintaining a polished modern aesthetic. Under his influence, the Rebels transformed from a disorganized collective into a highly influential and feared organization, with Nick acting as the rock star figurehead of this new, corporate-style underworld entity. Yet, behind the formidable public persona, lay a complex duality that few outsiders were privileged to see. In 2005, the same year he cemented his place in the club, Nick met Amanda, the woman his father would describe as his absolute equal. To the public, the idea of a hardened enforcer having a soft side seemed contradictory, but to his family, it was his defining trait. Amanda later recounted that Nick was her entire universe, describing a man who used his raw, tough exterior as a shield to protect a tender and devoted nature within. His daughter, TIA, alongside his mother and sister, painted a picture of a teddy bear, a fiercely loyal family man who compartmentalized his life, keeping the warmth of his home separate from the cold realities of his business dealings. However, maintaining this double life proved increasingly difficult as his influence expanded. As Nick climbed the ranks, the target on his back grew larger, The fragility of his world was brutally exposed in 2010, with the loss of his longtime friend, Mario Perren. Perren, whom Nick had personally introduced to the club, was the victim of a fatal attack right in front of his family. This tragedy was a deeply personal blow to Nick, signaling that the conflicts surrounding the club were no longer just business, they were existential threats. Tensions were boiling over with rival factions, specifically the Rock Machine and the Comancheros. While the feud with the Comancheros was an imported conflict from the East Coast, the war with the Rock Machine was a local struggle for territory, respect, and the right to wear the patch. The violence reached Nick's doorstep in March 2011. As he arrived home on his Harley-Davidson, the silence of the driveway was shattered by gunfire. A projectile struck the fuel tank of his motorcycle, sending shrapnel tearing into his left elbow. It was a close call that would have terrified an ordinary man, but Nick's reaction only added to his legend. He checked himself into the hospital, only to discharge himself the very next day. Facing the media with a bandaged arm and a bullet-scarred bike, he offered a chillingly casual taunt to his would-be attackers, "Better luck next time." It was a moment of supreme bravado, but it masked a darkening reality. The Man Mountain was not invincible, and his enemies were becoming more brazen by the day. By 2018, the iron grip Nick Martin held over the rebels began to slip, eroded by a convergence of legal pressures and internal dissent. The walls were closing in. Martin was battling serious allegations involving extortion and complex financial crimes, including tax evasion. These legal battles were not only costly, but distracting, compromising his ability to steer the organization effectively. Inside the club, the atmosphere turned toxic. Whispers circulated regarding the mismanagement of club resources, specifically membership dues that seemed to vanish into Martin's personal home renovation projects, rather than the club's treasury. The simmering tension boiled over when Aaron Carl LeBrook, a close ally turned rival, confronted Martin. LeBrook characterized Martin's leadership style as increasingly dictatorial. Facing a mutiny, Martin agreed to step aside. While framed as a resignation to stabilize the group, it was, in reality, a forced abdication that signaled to the underworld that the king was vulnerable. Even without the title of president, Martin remained a formidable figure, but the aura of invincibility was fading. This shift in perception was publicly displayed in November 2020. Just weeks before the final tragedy, at the Sandbar Hotel in Scarborough, Martin found himself face-to-face with Dane Brakovic, a high-ranking member of the Hells Angels, and a former cage fighter. What began with a deceptive handshake quickly escalated into a violent physical confrontation. In full view of patrons and CCTV cameras, the two men clashed. Brakovic's combat training was evident, as he overpowered the former rebels' leader, landing a series of heavy blows. Although Martin managed to walk away from the altercation with his composure seemingly intact, the damage was done. He had been beaten in public. The footage went viral, and to his enemies it was blood in the water. The Man Mountain could be hurt. The final countdown began on the evening of December 12, 2020. The setting was the Perth Motorplex, hosting the Outlaw Nitro Challenge, a loud, chaotic event attended by thousands of families. It was the perfect cover for a covert operation. Around 8:30 p.m., as the dragsters screamed down the track, the noise reached a crescendo that would mask the sound of a high-powered rifle discharge. Martin was seated in the crowd, surrounded by innocent bystanders, completely unaware that a scope was trained on his chest from hundreds of meters away. The impact was sudden. A single projectile, fired from a distance that made the shooter invisible to the naked eye, struck Martin in the torso. Due to the deafening roar of the engines, those sitting mere inches away did not hear the shot. Martin, however, knew immediately what had happened. As he collapsed, he turned to his wife Amanda and uttered the chilling realization, "Babe, I have been struck." Initially, the chaos of the moment led Amanda and others to believe he was suffering a medical emergency, perhaps a heart attack, brought on by the heat and excitement. It was not until Amanda looked down at her hands, now covered in the tragic evidence of his injury, that the horrifying reality set in. This was not a natural event. Panic rippled through the stands as paramedics rushed to the scene, but the precision of the strike left no chance for survival. Before he could be transported to safety, Nick Martin had succumbed to his injuries. Nearby, Ricky Chapman, the partner of Martin's stepdaughter, was also wounded by the same projectile, a testament to the velocity and danger of the weapon used. The Man Mountain had fallen, not in a dark alley, but under the floodlights of a public arena. The immediate aftermath of the tragedy at the Perth Motorplex was defined by a palpable sense of dread that permeated Western Australia. The public nature of the event, carried out with such terrifying precision amidst innocent families, signaled a dangerous escalation in underworld hostilities. Authorities immediately recognized the potential for a retaliatory wave of violence. In response, a massive task force known as Operation Ravello was assembled, pulling together hundreds of officers from various specialized squads. The state government, understanding the gravity of the situation and the wall of silence that often protects such figures, offered a historic reward of $1 million for information leading to the apprehension of the person responsible. While the investigation operated in the shadows, the farewell to Nick Martin was a highly visible spectacle. Held on December 23, 2020, the funeral was a show of force, with a convoy of motorcycles roaring through the city streets, under the watchful gaze of a police helicopter. The casket, adorned with images of $100 bills, served as a final symbol of Martin's larger-than-life persona, even as marksmen watched from the perimeter to ensure the peace was kept. For months, the identity of the individual who pulled the trigger remained a mystery, fueling rampant speculation. However, on March 15, 2021, the breakthrough arrived, shattering the theories that this was merely a messy gang brawl gone wrong. Police arrested a 34-year-old man, whose profile was drastically different from the usual suspects found in Bikie dossiers. The accused was not a career criminal with a long rap sheet, but a former soldier and a thrill-seeker, associated with an international humanitarian group known as Shadows of Hope. This organization, which billed itself as the world's most fearless charity, operated in high-risk conflict zones like Syria and Southeast Asia. The revelation that the marksman was a man who had dedicated time to medical and relief work added a surreal and disturbing layer to the case. He was a disciplined operator who lived a life of extreme contrasts. The investigation revealed that the operation against Martin had been planned with military-grade meticulousness. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision, but a calculated mission. In the weeks leading up to the event, the marksman had conducted extensive surveillance on Martin, learning his patterns and movements. He had visited the Motorplex multiple times to study the topography, assessing wind, lines of sight, and security gaps. In a chilling detail of preparation, he had even physically altered the environment, removing a safety ramp at the track to ensure an unobstructed trajectory for his shot. On the day of the event, the marksman arrived prepared for a tactical insertion. Dressed in full camouflage gear, he bypassed the main crowds, cutting a hole in the perimeter fence to gain access to a patch of dense vegetation he had previously scouted. He crawled into position, blending into the scrubland, where he lay in wait. For 10 to 15 minutes he observed Martin through the scope of a high-powered rifle, waiting for the perfect moment when his target would settle. From a distance of over 300 meters, a range that required expert handling, he released the single fatal round. Immediately following the act, he engaged in a disciplined extraction, discarding his camouflage suit and vanishing into the night before the confusion in the stands had even subsided. He had executed what many feared was the perfect crime. Despite the operator's disciplined execution and ghost-like extraction, the unraveling of this complex case hinged on a single, seemingly innocuous decision made in the weeks following the tragedy. In January 2021, believing the heat had died down, the marksman took his rifle to a licensed gunsmith to have the barrel replaced. It was a technical adjustment, likely intended to alter the weapon's ballistic fingerprint, but it ultimately served as the catalyst for his downfall. Authorities, through tireless forensic work, seized the discarded barrel. In a triumph of modern science, ballistics experts were able to match the rifling on this specific component to the projectile fragments removed from Ricky Chapman, the survivor, who had been seated next to Martin. The weapon was linked to the crime, and the veil of anonymity began to lift. Once the connection was made, the evidence cascaded. Investigators matched footprints discovered in the vegetation at the Motorplex to a specific pair of Fila running shoes the suspect was seen wearing on CCTV days prior. Furthermore, digital triangulation placed his mobile device at the scene during the critical window of the operation. Perhaps most damning was the discovery of the financial trail. Police located bundles of cash, totaling thousands of dollars, buried inside PVC pipes deep within the bushland. This hidden fortune was the final piece of the puzzle, linking the marksman to the true architect of the plot David James Pye. Pye, a former rebel turned comanchero, known in the underworld as the Baker, was identified as the mastermind who had allegedly commissioned the strike. The investigation suggested a narrative of preemptive survival. Pye reportedly believed that Martin had placed a contract on his own life, leading him to offer a $150,000 bounty to the sniper to strike first. The violence was not random, but a calculated move in a high-stakes chess game between rival factions. Pye was arrested in late 2021, charged with orchestrating the event and other serious offenses, though he maintains his innocence and is prepared to fight the charges in a trial rescheduled for 2025. In December 2021, the marksman faced the consequences of his actions. Acknowledging his role, he pleaded guilty. The court heard details of the meticulous planning and the cold, transactional nature of the assignment. However, in a twist that sent shockwaves through the criminal fraternity, the sniper agreed to cooperate with authorities, providing vital intelligence against Pye. In exchange for his testimony, he avoided a life term, receiving a sentence of 20 years with a non-parole period of 18 years. The judge noted his prior military service and history of PTSD as factors, but emphasized the severity of a public execution. Today, the legacy of that December night continues to unfold. While the man who pulled the trigger sits behind bars, the legal battle for the alleged mastermind is yet to conclude. Meanwhile, Nick Martin's family seeks accountability elsewhere. His widow and stepdaughter have launched civil proceedings against the state government of Western Australia, alleging negligence in failing to ensure public safety at the venue, seeking damages for the profound psychological trauma of witnessing the event. The single shot fired that summer evening did more than end the life of a bikie boss. It shattered the illusion of safety in public spaces and reshaped the hierarchy of the Australian underworld forever. The story of Nick Martin serves as a grim reminder that in the world of Trav Laxi, organized crime, power is fleeting, and the shadows are always watching.